Right. Hello again, for those of you listening to the recording, and anyone else who just joined us as well. And then, um, first off, mention those of you who are trying to listen to my voice. I do have a bit of a speech, I say enhancement as opposed to a disability. I'm a cancer survivor, and still 10 years out dealing with stuff from that, but I'm still here. And my speech therapist has reminded me to speak slowly and enunciate for all of you, so I will do my best to do that. Apologize if I've not been as verbal in the short term just recently. I started some special treatments to help me with swallowing and speech. And I've been was in the hospital for 2 different days last week for that, and again this week as well. So I'm trying to get through with that. I have a whole bunch more treatments to do this summer, but here I am 10 years out, and I'm doing fine other than obviously speech. So, but I'm here. So thanks for all of you being here tonight. I hope to answer your comments there too, Mario, and perfect public speaking is certainly not to me. But I will try my best for you guys, and do appreciate you being here tonight. I skimmed through the chat box up above there and noticed that many of you had some comments about the essay on your midterm, and I promise you I will post several, after I go through them all, I will post several model answers so you can see the best answers. But as I will remind you, both on that exam and for your final exam, there is no one right answer for these problems, and there is what's most important, I think, from my perspective for you to get from this class is to be able to analyze problems like that and make reasonable, well thought out arguments for that. And we'll practice that again tonight with the area of criminal law for this week. But that problem I gave you is actually a real-life problem that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to end up dealing with, I imagine, in the not-too-distant future, based on our current decision that was made that enables gays and lesbians to get married. 3 people in Montana actually filed a lawsuit to be able to be married as a trio of people, and so that's based on a real case. I just happened to move it to Arizona. It could happen in any state, and we'll probably see more of those cases too. So you all had to sort of extrapolate from the ability that we've seen from the decision that was made by the Supreme Court to apply that to another situation. So that will pose some dilemmas for the Supreme Court as they approach the next round, I think, on this issue. But for the time being, that is the law. Couple of announcements to just remind you. Quite a few of you took me up on the offer of extra credit to participating in Rapid Fire this week. If you look at the syllabus, you will notice that there is no required Rapid Fire for this week, but if you had posted your initial post by midnight or 11:59 last night, you had the opportunity to add 2 responses at least by Saturday, as opposed to Friday, since I posted it very late for you all. But that would be extra credit of up to 15 points for you if you do that. Just to remind you, Saturday, not Friday, but Saturday by midnight, 11:59 as well. The next collaborate that we have, our next and final one actually, is on your syllabus as the 5th of August at 10 to 11 a.m. again. I will then post another Google poll and hope to get more people to respond, and hopefully have it scheduled at a time where we can get some people who haven't been able to participate in this live session, because I hope, as you have seen, that it should be meaningful for you to be able to have this opportunity as opposed to just a normal discussion board sort of a way of doing this. And let me just look real fast and see. I don't know how many of you have not been here before. and use this software, but a few of you. So just to remind you of the interface of this, and I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. So many people who have looked at the recording said this chat box is a little bit small for them to see. But to remind you, for those of you who are new to this software, you have emotive hands in particular at the top portion here on the top left. And if you agree with something, if you're confused by something, please by all means put some sign up there so I have an idea of what's happening for you. If you have to step away for something that's going on at home or wherever you are, just the next silhouette with a watch face on it, timepiece face on it, just push on that and you can step away. And then this is your first time doing this, and I hope again the recording with my voice is picked up well enough and can help you. You might have to go back and listen again to be sure you got my speech right. I hope to be able to have something to do subtitles for this, and there is a process to have that done. I know the Disabilities Office can do it, and e-learning also can do it, but it takes time, and it won't typically happen. Most often doesn't happen within the one window you have to get the summary and analysis done. So that is a bit of a challenge here. So we'll see what we can do for you on this next one. So, and then you have also if you have a question, there's a raise hand button that's up there at the top left to see the hand. Please by all means do that. And on my end it shows what order people have pressed that button, so I can call on people in order for that. And so, and then there's another button for polls, which we're not going to do a poll tonight, but that's also there. When we separate into rooms, which we'll do tonight, we separate into small breakout rooms. You should be able to see the names of people in your group here there. If you move the chat box down, you can see other names. You should be able to see names of other people in the class who are here tonight. And but when you get moved into a particular chat room, be sure you can use the whiteboard. And then those of you who haven't done this before, the practice day, you're absolutely right, we'll do this again. Be sure to, there's a capital letter A with some lines on it, and there's also just a capital letter A that's there. The one with the lines on it is what you want to double click or just flip once on. That will enable you to put the text box over here, and then type whatever you want to type in there. And then enlarge it because it also shows you the type of font you have. So the capital letter A with lines on it there, sort of in the middle, enables you to be able to put a text box wherever you want. That's especially important when you use the breakout rooms, so you can add to the conversation. And that you to also use your microphone or the chat box when you're doing this as well. Most of you are obviously using the chat box already down below. When you're in small breakout rooms and you're given a task, a discussion board, the discussion question, you'll be able to then add in the chat box below, or preferably so that when we share our whiteboards, we should be able to do this in a few minutes. That there's some notes for your team on the board on that, okay? So I'm just going to go to a new page here for all of us. I'm not sure who is probably look out there, so page 1. And literally about a minute or something. Those of you who haven't used this before, Mario, I see a question mark about putting the text box. There's several icons in sort of the middle frame to the right of the participants in chat box area. You should see, and there's markers you can mark things on the board with. It behooves you all to just practice for a minute and say, those of you who haven't done this before, just take 1 minute because I want some substance of what we do tonight to take place. But you can do this by way of markings to highlight something, or there is a box there's actually there that enables you to throughout the test box to put I have someone's doing a hand there. And how this is a test to put the test box text box, and it's very important for you for your for your various small groups we're going to bring hand into. So hopefully we'll have that. Before we move on, any questions or comments? You guys, and then I apologize. I've muted week 2 and week 3 rapid fire. I'm in the midst of reading all those, so you'll see lots of reads coming up. My habit on the midterms like that, and the final I do the same thing as I don't read a single essay until I go through about anywhere from 5 to 10 of them to get a feel of how people proceed with the problem. You know, sometimes I feel like I was very certain about how I wrote the problem, and then I see that people absolutely missed something that I thought was obvious, and so then I read everybody according to that. I don't have sort of one set model and expect everybody to fit into that. So so you will see lots of videos coming up. I apologize. And then last week and this week were very much my time spent doing hospital treatments, but tonight and the next few days I should be doing much more on all of that for you. So any questions or comments before we get into substance tonight here? Well, guys, all right, sounds good. Let me post a new page here and start off with this piece. I suggested when I posted the URL for tonight's session, I suggested that you at least, without having to read the whole chapter, just review shortly the several hints that are there. So what I want to do is the you be the judge. I can't say that real well, but you be the judge. And then please, any of you, if there's something you don't quite follow from what I'm saying, please by all means raise your hand and stop me. Write a question in the text box. Let me know. I'm more than happy to stop. That's why we're doing this, so we're all literally on the same page. I want you to review these cases for tonight. We want to look at a couple of them, not all of them, but and we're going to go back and see if I can get this to cooperate in. Test box. Yeah, it looks fine on the first slide, but here we go. You guys should all know this by now. I'm going to just a momentary review, so I want to just be sure that we're on the same page about this process, and then for the essay on the midterm and final, you don't have to bring it this way. I think it's a very valuable tool to be following this process, because it's a great way to break down and make sense of some complicated problems that we were seeing with the law. Okay, so focusing first on the most important facts, and those facts raise an issue, a couple of main issues that should always be posed as a question or questions for the court to decide. And the holding then is essentially the answer to those questions, yes or no, and a bit of a piece as to maybe a little more social point, that not just yes, the defendant wins, but yes, the defendant wins in these certain types of situations. And then the rationale is the explanation, the reasoning behind it. And I think it's very important to have this be sort of a habit of how you look at the various case law problems that we'll have. So with that in mind, this first one, the UV drugs problem, was, and we grab the site of this, was from the test book. And, and then while we do this, essentially the answer is right in the test book, but I'm going to, so then I just will shuffle it, and there it is, bring this down. This first one, Ohio versus Smith, is, and there's the page numbers for you, and this, there's a user error is often a problem in these things too, you guys. It's me not being fast enough. I'm trying to submit this up, so use this a little bit more fancy than actually serious. But this is the heads we're going to talk about initially here, right? And so I would just maybe as opposed to going to small breakout rooms first, I would like you to learn this one problem and anyone identify what the most important facts are here. Please feel free to take the microphone anyone if you want to, or if you don't have a microphone tonight that's operating, feel free to write in the text box. But what essentially, what are a few, start with this, a few of the basic, most important facts here. And I'll hit notes here. I'll put it up on here. If anyone wants to take the microphone, please feel free. So if he's silent, you guys, anybody wants to say? I see a few people typing around the test bars, first I had the Cyrus at the self-understanding our warrants. You're absolutely right. We want to get to closing this, but Harry, you said there's a drug overdose, and phone numbers of the dealer, as we get to. And then, yes, we have a woman who's overdose and her hand, and then to drug dealer, and that's really getting into this issue of a warrant and so forth. So, Alan, you have your hand up first. I'll pass the microphone to you. And then those of you who are new to this, when you use the microphone, just press on the microphone up above that top corner there, and then when you're done speaking, press again so that the next person be able to speak. So, Alan, the microphone is yours, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I guess the issue would be the police, did they have the right to search his phone after he was set up by the girl that had the drug overdose?
Yeah, you're hiding me, but you're absolutely right. That's on, you're 100% on. I just and multiple people. Let me back up. Multiple of you have basically highlighted Cyrus highlighted basically all talking about the main facts. Let me I think my test box is not working now. Maybe else is back in here. There we go. Basically, as many of you have highlighted, there's a woman has a drug overdose. She's in the hospital. She names her dealer, and the police essentially, she arranges to have a deal. He comes to the house. The police arrest Antoine Smith, her dealer, at her house when he arrives, and then her house, and then they confiscate his phone, right? Take his phone, and then review the contents of it, as many of you mentioned in the test box over here in the chat box. They review it, and they have no warrant. And thanks for adding that piece to the audience. So issue here then. So let me and then highlight. Let me have the test box acknowledged here. It's moving on. Somebody might be trying to grab that, but moving on. So And then when we look at the facts, the most important aspect of this is that there was a drug issue, illegal drugs, an overdose. She's in the hospital. She names this person. They arranged to have him do another deal with her. And in the phone, essentially, the contents that they had discovered have information that showed that he made these telephone calls, right? So we look back to people posting some comments. Now, Jordan, did the woman that no traumatized me as determined to do? That's not the subject of our case, but that's a good question. Michael, you mentioned that the police should have gotten this information from the phone records, phone carrier, and that the testament they mentioned is too as well a good point. And so, I'm sure you're talking about our phones are not just as the police went to say in this point that they said the phone is essentially just an address, but is that enough? Is that all it does nowadays? And we know nowadays that obviously it is definitely much more. Our smartphones do a lot more than that. So at the end of the day here, as many of you talking about, you have the question about a search that's been done, right? And this is some other comments here too I'm going to go through. Important question is whether the cell phone is a teacher an address, but that is the right arm. Okay? So our issue then, we'll go back to this, and Alan, if you want to be stated, please, and I'm going to move this, I'll move this box up a little bit, and I'll stop the microphone. Alan, I'm sorry, if you will please restate the issue that you stated, because I think all of the classmates are getting added to here. So, Alan.
Okay. I was basically just saying, did the police have the probable cause to search his phone after they had arrested him?
Well, it was a legal search, so my question is, wouldn't they still be able to without a warrant?
I'm sorry, Melissa. Henry said that would they still be able to do this without a warrant? Is what you're saying? Melissa, I'm not sure. I think maybe that fell off there, but our main issue here is you guys are getting that. Bro, this isn't hot rate. It was right on top of where I went to India to write on him. The ultimate question here is this an unlawful search? So we're getting at the end of the day, this is a Fourth Amendment issue of illegal search and seizure. And Melissa, I'm sorry, restate the question, how you're saying that?
Oh, I thought it, so my question was, since it was a legal search, wouldn't they still be able to look at the contents of the phone?
No, that's ultimately our issue here, right? The police have probable cause to search him, do they not? I mean, here's a drug overdose person. She has provided the drugs to her. She makes the follow him to the house, and then they have probable cause to arrest him. So I'm going back to some of the comments here. There's certainly probable cause to arrest him and search him. Question is whether they have probable cause to search the phone. Do they have the right to search the phone? And this at the end, I'm not sure who. And then who? Let me move this up again. Someone had mentioned this fundamental question that we're ultimately getting at is this difference between the cell phone being just an address, but that's Fidesz, you mentioned it as very, is this just an address, but or is there something more in the phone? And why do they ask that? ultimately asking that question because we're talking about the issue of privacy here. So while this is a Fourth Amendment issue in terms of an unwarranted search and seizure of evidence, there are a few aspects of this that relate to police, what they're supposed to do when they arrest someone. And mostly they're actually in turn appropriate question when an arrest takes place, do police search people? Are they entitled to? And the answer is yes. They can search the immediate premises where the person is located, and they can search the clothing and things like that. So I'm looking back at lots of comments here. Having access to the phone, but can't look through it without some words. This is our issue, right? Do they have probable cause? Do they have a right to search the phone? So let me put this: is this an illegal or unwarranted search of the phone? If the phone was just an address book, and you're having an address book on you, a physical, old-fashioned, hard copy one, in the search of the person, the police may be entitled to look at that, right? But in a cell phone, you have much more information than that, and that's the ultimate issue here. Does that still mean so what? This person was stopped, lawfully stopped. Should they be allowed to, essentially hide what's on their phone? And someone up above, and above all the text here, someone up above had mentioned that there's a question ultimately about whether the provider can give this information, the cell phone service provider. If the police went back and had a warrant and then asked the provider to do that, they very well likely could, incident to a lawful arrest, which this was. The cell phone provider would very likely then give that information, and then they'd be there. But as Stella mentioned above, the police essentially dropped the gun here, went a little bit too fast, by just going through the cell phone and then having this evidence. So I'll hold in at the end of the day, and then we might have some difference of opinion on this. Jordan was saying that the devil's advocate, police do have some reason for concern. She came in on a drug overdose, and then they moved to the danger in this case of drug deal off the streets. Let's ask a question here. I'm going to stop talking myself and say the textbook points out some arguments on both sides of this problem. Okay, so let me get to the next step here in our analysis for holding, which is the answer to our question. So who says that Smith wins, the defendant, that he should have this evidence prohibited from being in? So we're ultimately talking about a question of excluding the evidence of what is on the cell phone, right? And we're also asking, the way to get that answer is whether this search was unlawful. So if anyone wants to take the point of defense attorney for Mr. Smith, please feel free. I'll pass the microphone. Cyrus, your hand is up.
Yeah, I think Smith is the right one in this situation, because I believe that you have to have a warrant to obtain like the cell phone in this case. However, there's nothing that the police had that was in danger. So, like if the phone or Smith was harming the police officers, then they would have the right to take the phone without a warrant. But in this case, I don't think that was the right thing to do.
The police have the right to take the cell phone, but they didn't have the right to examine the information on it because there were no extreme circumstances or an immediate need for the information. Since they had plenty of time to wait, in order to get a warrant, there was no time pressure. They could have followed the proper procedure. There was no extreme circumstances or immediate need for information. Therefore, Smith wins because,
That's right on, and I see a lot of people are reading down here in the chat box with the same thing. At the end of the day, the answer here, as you can imagine, is Smith wins, and the evidence, if I can type it, is smooth, right? And our reasoning at the end of the day here is essentially the first reasoning was that the cell phone we're entitled to some privacy with what's on that information or on that device, and had this been a situation where there was a question of the officer's safety, if this was a knife, a gun, this was a violent crime that we're talking about, and there's some danger, there's a weapon involved in this, or let's say, for example, the cell phone was going to be used to operate a remote explosive device or something like that, then that they would be entitled to get that information. But there's no evidence of that here, and because of that, the evidence is being excluded and was lawfully excluded. Right? So, yeah, and having to mention here, a controlled by the truth that was Smith. That's kind of interesting that this is how they did it, that they had the victim essentially, who's also obviously using this unlawful drug, set this person up, and there's some question about that too. Would he have done this otherwise? And answer in this case is he would have obviously sold more of the drug because he was a dealer of this drug. So, end of the day here we have a Fourth Amendment question and a privacy question, which privacy doesn't appear, the word right to privacy does not appear in the Constitution, but ultimately that's what we get at in resolving the case. Right? And the comments I've made. I'm going to switch this for a second now and add some new stories for you all to chew on. If I can get this to come up, it's I give you, there's a lot of text here, but and I'll try to enlarge it, especially those of you who are looking at the recording here. I mean, it should be, because we won't fit on the whole board probably, but the gist of this situation, real live, real case that happened. So there's an anonymous tip that this house in Florida, in Miami, is being used as a place to grow marijuana. Unlike Washington State, where recreational pot, and at this time, 2006, even medicinal pot was not lawful in Florida. This anonymous tip goes to the police that this house has been used to unlawfully grow marijuana. So the police show up at the person's house and there was a drug-sniffing dog, and when they arrive at the house, the dog signals that there is marijuana or some kind of narcotics present. The police officer says he or she can smell marijuana, so they then go away and they prepare their report, an affidavit essentially, and they go to the judge, they get a search warrant, they come back with a search warrant, and when they search the house, of course, they find marijuana being grown there. And Mr. Jardines, those of you who know Spanish, Jardin is, I can't say it well because of my speech issue, but ironically, it's the word for garden. So he's a garden of pot growing in his house, and so he essentially makes a motion to exclude evidence, like we saw in the last case, but saying that the dog sniffing was essentially was a search And so the question here at the end of the day, there's a lot of back and forth with what the judicial system did in the case, but the state of Florida has appealed this to the U.S. Supreme Court, and so I would, rather than just open, I'll open this up again as maybe the last one for you to do, maybe the session question to do in private, and we'll talk about this. But anyone, again, following this method, just stay on track with me for a second. Most important facts. What are the most important facts here? And you're going to start with what you see. Okay? When you have a good question, jump in the non-familiar, please. Will anonymous be enough for probable cause? That's a very public question, but you're moving us towards the issue. Mario, you have your hand up. So what's our most important facts here?
I find the dog handler, he acted off an unverified Crime Stoppers tip. And in doing so, he approached the home, the residence, and the Hardeen's residence, and this ultimately concluded the Florida Supreme Court to decide this was what he did right there was constituted a search.
Thank you, Mario. Yeah, I'm just going to go back to looking at some of the comments about dog refuses to smell marijuana. Wendy, I'm going to go back down here and then for a second, sorry. Silas, dog refuses to smell marijuana. Harry, the dog sniffed the home for marijuana. Kevin, a couple of us are saying here, don't think anonymous tip should be, but the drug dog smelling pot should be enough. Really, I mean, the important facts, they had a warrant before entering the property. They did have a warrant. There's no doubt about that. How did they get the warrant, though? This is the question. First of all, you're on track with me. Facts would be there's a dog. The dog isn't just the neighbor's dog, it's the police dog. And all of you were ahead in the first step of finding about the tip, and that's very appropriate. But the police arrived because of the tip as anonymous, and is that sufficient is a good question. But most important fact, police dog is there and sniffs this, and is it appropriate where is it the legitimate way for police to search the house? Absolutely. Vehicles, they search all the time this way. And so acting on a tip is what you guys are all focusing on. Very good. I'm going back to again some other comments. Just by the way, if you listen to know, I'm going to, as a routine, provide in the Word document all of our chat box material, so you have access to this after incidents collaborates as well, so you can go back and look at that as well. So police also smelled it, the right feeling. My whole dog smelled marijuana, detected the two, you guys are right on there. But, so in this reason that several of you are concerned about the fact that they had this anonymous tip, and Harry said they found the pot in the house after they got to Lawrence. This is absolutely true. How did they get to Lawrence was the question, right? And most of this, the warrant was issued, right? And the warrant was issued based on the dog smelling and on the officer smelling, right? And the dog was signaling by the way they are trained to do based on what it was. Hello, Harry, this is really an appropriate question. And by the way, what I'd love to see here, all of you guys, this is really, really good. Those of you who participated in I think, the practice session, and I'm going to add it right here at the end here. And also, I'm multitasking here, one second. Let me see. I'll type and try to talk at the same time. lawyers don't have answers, they have arguments, okay? Something to keep in mind, and that what I love and what I'm seeing from authors here is having lots of questions. And that's like the first thing that should jump out at you about any of these problems. What in the world do we want to know more of? And it's very, you have a very good statement here. Take the dog out of this. If there is no dog, should the officers get a warrant still based on that? And still, you say yes. But let's see. I'm gonna pose that question. Fairly as a very appropriate question. How many of you would say, yes, without the dog, the police officer smelling this, they should be able to get a warrant? Is that enough? When you have your hand up, please feel free to take the microphone. When you have your hand up, if you want to take the microphone, feel free. Aaron, you have your hand up. The microphone is yours.
Okay, my question would be, this might be jumping ahead. The Florida court reversed the appellate court's decision about the dog sniff was the substantial government intrusion into the Fourth Amendment. But don't they use those drug dogs in airports to find criminals with drugs, bringing them into the country?
Absolutely. What's very important here, I'm not going to say it, I'm going to let off for all views that someone responds it. What's different about this situation than airport bomb sniffing or drug sniffing dogs? Cyrus, microphone's yours.
Well, I think that dogs, they walk through the streets, for example, and like you said, the airport. So I do think that, when we're talking about search and seizures, I think that would slide through and count as it. If they're just roaming around and they smell something suspicious, then that would count as a search, and they could have the access to go and find the source.
I think that's most important, and there's a lot of constitutional law, and Alan, I'm going to answer you very directly on this, a lot of constitutional law, common law in the U.S. to support the notion that our homes are the most private area we occupy. And our home is very different from a bus, an airplane, an airport, the public street, an office building, anything like that. And so the sensitivity about government being able to intrude in your home in any way is a big deal. Suppose, as Harry has said, there is no dog here, and the police just walk up to your step and say that they smell marijuana in your house and they get a warrant, right? How good is this police officer at doing this, number one? And I suppose number two, how windy of a day is it? Was it in the neighbor's house that this happened on or whatever? And should the police just be able to walk up on your step and do this? Should they be able to bring a dog to someone's house? Suppose they're at the wrong house. Suppose that they have the dog and they want to walk up and down the street where they believe a lot of criminal activity is going on, and they walk up to your house, to your front door, and do this. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I don't really want the police, not that I'm doing anything unlawful, but I don't certainly want anyone, a stranger or police or anyone, to walk up to our front door with a dog. And out of fear, my daughter will reach out and try to pet every single puppy, every dog she sees. And as you all know, not all dogs are friendly. So our homes under the law are considered to be more protected. And so having the police, as many of you have noted here, having the police arrive at the house based on an anonymous tip number 1, and then conduct the search. Yes, the dog did this. But the question is, the police officer might be able to smell this, but the dog is definitive evidence from in terms of law has been a device that's, as a device would be a technology almost, well trained to do this. I mean, all the dogs typically have much better sense of smell than human beings do. And so there might be some skepticism on a police officer going to the judge and saying, the only evidence I have is an anonymous tip, and I believe I smell pot in this building, right? And so there's some concern about that. So multiple questions are being raised by all of you. I like that. Our issue at the end of the day here is ultimately, was the warrant obtained lawfully to search? Because we have to go back to the issue of whether the dog sniffing constituted a search in itself. That's our real issue, right? So here is a police officer. I'm trained to smell pot as well. You're absolutely right. There's no doubt about that. And most of us have smelled it enough, especially in Washington State now. We know most of us have smelled it somewhere. It doesn't take any training to do this, but having the dog, come up on the property and the police officer based on this anonymous tip, as many of you have also cited, was it. So our issue at the end of the day was the dog sniffing, did it constitute an actual search, and then if so, then they had to have a warrant for the dog to sniff, based on some belief that there had probable cause that something unlawful was happening on the premises, other than just a Crime Stopper tip. Okay? So our issue then is it lawful? Was the warrant obtained lawfully? And the answer to the question, and then there would be one right answer here, but the U.S. Supreme Court did decide in the 5-4 decision that the dog sniffing was a search. The dog sniffing itself mandated a warrant, which they did not have before they did it. So at the end of the day, the U.S. Supreme Court said this was an unlawful search of the premises. Okay? Mario, you have your hand up.
Yes, Steve. I was wondering if the searches without a warrant, there are 7 circumstances under which police may search without a warrant. This search does not fall under those 7 circumstances. Was this a factor in the Florida Supreme Court's decision? Do you know?
Well, actually, the U.S. Supreme Court was the ultimate decider of this one. Florida, you see, the state of Florida appealed the Florida Supreme Court's decision, and the Florida Supreme Court said it violated privacy of the home, and therefore violated the Fourth Amendment. The U.S. Supreme Court looked at this too, and I'm not positive. I haven't read through the whole opinion of the U.S. Supreme Court on this, but it is very certain that this was seen as a violation of privacy right of someone's home, and that. But I guess I should say it this way: the dog sniffing was considered a device, just as if I used some kind of a thermal imaging device that would tell what's happening inside of a home. That would be considered an intrusion too, and that's what the end result was here. That the dog is the same as an air tester, Margaret, and said inside and outside the home. The question here is, do the police walk up to people's homes based on anonymous tips, and should they be able to do that? And that's without a warrant. They had the warrant to go in the house, but it was based on evidence that they obtained, and the evidence they obtained was not just a police officer, but the dog sniffing, and so that was the main problem here. I promised we're going to do breakout rooms, and we're going to do that now, so we're going to have a chance. I'm going to turn both of these off, right? And let me go back to our page 1, go back to the last page here. Hi, Mrs. Smith. I'm just going to delete the page. Yes, that's our first page here. And delete that. So that we met here. So, all right. Let me show my grab here for 1 second. And I'm going to step over here and put a profession book for you. Right? There's so much stuff in criminal law we can talk about. Let me grab one. I think I'm certain we'll get us finishing up here at the hour with lots of comments, I'm sure. All right. So I'm going to put this. Many of you may have heard of the term recidivist. Maybe not that term so much as you are aware of what we call repeat criminals, right? And certain, let's say this is Boston right here. So, I'm not sure I really like how this, how Blackbird Collaborate works in this way, but I'm going to put up the term here. You all know repeat criminal, but this is the term I'd like you to know. Recidivism. Okay? And you all know this as repeat criminals. There's a folks that commit a crime and then commit another crime and obviously doing this and then. So the textbook has some information on this, and I think it is fundamentally important. I would invite you, I think it's, I'm going to go back the first, it is slide number 9. But if you look at this PowerPoint I have for you, slides 6, 7, 8, and 9, and actually 10 too, 6 through 10, right? Say it wrong. Slides 6 through 10 of our PowerPoint this week. That has the root of our criminal justice system. So, how you have it, you say 67%. How many returned to committing new crimes? And what's interesting, and I'm going to close this for you because I want you to think about this. And we'll come back into more details in a few minutes here, but I'm going to put this. Why is this the question? Is the question, and don't answer that, please. I have a couple that go along with this. So give me some numbers, and I'm going to give you some other questions to do with this. But Tyler, you said 67%, and let me put this up here first. Wow, that is really small. Imagine how the text works on this software. And so I'm going to have you do this in small groups so we're not all talking at once. And I'll move all these questions onto your boards in between. And then there's really 3 questions, well, not more than 3 questions, but we don't have a lot of time left. But so, ballpark percentage of prisoners that return to prison for committing new crimes. This recidivism or repeat, the measure by the type of crime, by how old someone is, whatever. Tell me what you think about this. I'm going to put us all in small groups. We have, how many of us are all together here? 18. So I'm going to put us in, I'm going to say this, 4 groups. And please try to answer these. Those of you who are doing this on your phone, try to come up with the thing about these questions too, because we probably won't finish it today, but I'm going to put this up here and separate us into small groups. So those on the recording, you will not hear us talking for a while. Listen to the recording, you have to look for the next vertical bar, which shows when we get back together again as a class, which will be about 3 minutes from now. Which is just about where we're out of time, but let me separate us up. And so we're going to go and insert into 4 rooms, and then you won't hear many others up in and out of the rooms, but let you to answer these questions as well, okay? So, I apologize if I cut anyone off in mid-speech there, but we should all be back together here as one class. Those of you in the recording can't necessarily pull up what we did in the small breakout rooms, but Mario, you have your hand up here.
Yes, you know, I know, you know, as far as race is concerned, African Americans seem to be disproportionately high percentage of inmates with, you know, in jails and prisons. I'm sure education plays an enormous factor, you know, outside of white collar crimes, of course, and sex. I would think males predominantly dominate the you know, the amount of prisoners and the ratio of prisoners in this country. And you know, as far as the crime committed, that's a bit more of a that's a bit of a different situation. I would think, you know, felons, yeah, you know, would be more likely to go back to committing felons. Yet, you know, I'm not exactly certain statistically on the number. Thank you.
Based on service, how much here?
Yeah, I think their citizen rate, it also, like we talked about, depends on the type of crime. Like, I think, for example, when we talk about, like, something like marijuana, where it's becoming more socially acceptable in certain states, like here in Washington, for example, it's legalized. However, more and more states are making it legal, so I think people are going to be coming back less for that to prison.
Good point, Chavez. And then I really invite you all to take a look at those several slides, number 6 through 10 in the PowerPoint if you haven't seen them yet. There's some really extremely powerful issues in criminal justice that are here, and I'll give you sort of some answers for you here. Because the ultimate one here, the why is a very, very tough question, because it's very complicated, and most of us like to have you know, very simple answers to this, but it isn't so simple. The war on drugs in the United States has meant an absolute blossoming of prison growth. You have to have more prisons to hold prisoners, and nonviolent crime has been the one that has been the largest growth in prison population. We have a relatively small population compared to the planet, and the numbers here, we have 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's prison population. The United States imprisons more people per capita than any country in the world. And when it comes down to it, one of our issues here is we have repeat criminals. If it was just about building more prisons and being tougher on crime, I don't remember who made the note in the chat box, but this issue of the three strikes you're out that you see in the urine case, this urine, I have to say, urine case is in our textbook. Urine versus California. There's the figure is roughly, someone said 67%, and it depends a lot on the type of crime. You see, as it's noted here, this is from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, government agency, a federal government agency. Property offense criminals have the highest. It's 82% repeat criminal. Illicit drugs is 77%, public order 74%, and then violent offenders 71%. And overall, that roughly comes out as having 67%, but it's broken also down by gender. Males are much more likely to be repeat offenders than women. African Americans, young adults, all that. And race is really a big issue that's involved here, and we have to address this in our criminal justice system. I shall put it down here if you haven't seen it. This is an amazing book. It's by, I think she's a former Yale law professor, now Harvard law professor, but The New Jim Crow was written by Michelle Alexander, and she very methodically, well-documented book that she's written highlights how racially slanted our criminal justice system is, and it's pretty phenomenal when you consider, I'm trying to move this out of this, so I'm going to just read this question here. 1 second, sorry guys. I just cut that. Very slanted when it comes to race as to repeat offenders. Let me add this to it, okay? We have the most prisons, the most people per 100,000 who are in prison in democracy, even in countries that we consider not to be democracies, and that was supposed to be harder on harsher crime, and debatable whether we're actually succeeding at this. Let me put this out here for you. We have, when you're done having committed a felony by definition is a year or more in prison. When you come out, as you see, 67% is a ballpark average of within 3 years or so you'll be back in prison. When you come out, you have a felon F branded on your forehead, because when you apply for jobs, when you apply for housing, you must say, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Usually that's a normal question. If you say no, and a background check is done, you lose your job. Housing is very, and then they say they're not discriminating against you when you talk about it, says yes, but housing and jobs, there's lots of discrimination that happens. And there's a big piece of that. So the options that can be very limited once you've had a felony record when you come back out. And we obviously also know there's a lot of other things attached to this, but drugs and alcohol abuse that are part of the reason why people have committed property crimes in the first place. So it's very complicated. Race and age and gender, the type of crime all play a role. So there's a system that is very much involved in this. So at any rate, we're over on time, everyone. Thank you so much for participating tonight. I apologize for hearing us over time, but please do look at the slides I have for you in the PowerPoint participant, and look to see some reds and then pop up for you. As I said, you see a few things have been muted as I'm moving through those things, and you'll see a bunch of those pop up at once very shortly. I'm not doing any treatment in the hospital in the short term, so that's being done. So this is the posting. So thanks a lot, you guys. Great job tonight, great comments, and appreciate your participation. So I'll stay for a couple of minutes. If anyone has any specific questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll say here, thanks, I'm glad. Thanks for having me. Thank you, guys.